Greetings to the brightest audience in the country. Welcome to Real Science Radio. I'm Fred Williams.
And I'm Doug McBurney, host of the weekly Worldview, Bible student, amateur comedian. It's great to be back with you, Fred, talking about real science on Friday.
Well, Doug, it's great to be back together again. And we had a listener email in a question. He's wondering, why do so many scientists still believe in evolution?
I've asked that. I've asked myself that, Fred. These are seemingly intelligent, educated people, yet they believe in something that's patently absurd. And I think I know just the person to give us the best answer to that question.
I bet you we're thinking of the same person, because we talked about this on a show we did with Dr. Royal Truman. It was one of my favorite shows this year, just because I love anything related to genetics and computer programming. And so Dr. Truman, it was a fantastic show on binding sites and how really you can't get stuff to work in the cell and with DNA with just chemicals. You need a computer program. So during that talk, it also came up about why do so many scientists believe in evolution? So there isn't a better person, Doug, I think, to answer that question than Dr. Royal Truman.
That's right. So you dial him up on the phone, Fred. While you do that, I am going to remind the audience that Royal Truman has a bachelor's in chemistry and in computer science from SUNY Buffalo, an MBA from the University of Michigan, a PhD in organic chemistry from Michigan State, and postgraduate studies in bioinformatics at the universities of Heidelberg and Mannheim in Germany. And Dr. Truman actually makes a living designing real things that people pay real money for because they're actually valuable. Dr. Truman, welcome back to Real Science Radio.
Yeah, thank you. As they say here in the Far East, es freut mich sehr, hier zu sein, mitzumachen. Does that sound like a good entry?
As they say south of the border here, okay?
Exactly.
Dr. Truman, we're definitely excited to have you with us. And we're actually really excited about our video capabilities. We recently went on YouTube. We've got a growing audience there. We realize most people listen to us on audio, and that's great. We'll always continue to stream on, various podcast platforms like Spotify and, Apple, whichever platform those guys have. But we are now on YouTube, where you can see a lot more visual graphics. So tune into our YouTube channel if you can. And of course, you're supposed to subscribe. I'm supposed to ask you to do that. So
constantly. That's right, Fred. At least 8 times during this show. Hit the subscribe button.
Yeah. So before we get started, Dr. Truman, there is this science alert. I like catching some of these news bits that show up on my feed. And this one is: useless organ that doctors often remove may actually fight cancer.
Oh,
shocker
you
there.
hate to hear that. Ouch.
Yep. So which one is this, Doug? I think you brought this article to my attention.
Yes, this was researchers have found that people who get their thymus removed, they face an increased risk of death from any cause later in life, and they also face an increased risk of developing cancer. Now, the study is purely observational, so they haven't shown that removing the thymus directly causes cancer or other fatal illnesses, but researchers are concerned at the findings, and they say that until they know more, they argue that preserving the thymus now should be a clinical priority, whereas before they were told by the evolutionists that this is a useless gland, probably left over from evolution. And it turns out that this study shows that there's a magnitude of risk related to cancer and all-cause death in people who've had this gland removed that researchers said it was something we would have never expected. And they said that the thymus is now it's known to play a critical role in developing the immune system. And when the gland is removed at a young age, patients show long-term reductions in T cells, which are a type of white blood cell that combats germs and disease. So it turns out cutting off supposedly useless organs in your body, it turns out that's a bad idea, and it's based on bad science. It's based on evolutionary theory.
Yeah, another case where belief in evolution is harmful for your health.
There you go. That's right. Yeah. But they all believe in it. And so that's why we've got you here, Dr. Truman. Help us understand, why do so many smart, educated people believe in evolution, or at least say they believe in evolution?
Yep, that is a very good question. I would say it's not at all intuitive. If you dumped 1,000 brilliant alien scientists on Earth and they looked all around and observed everything, they would not come to those ideas. So let me share some principles that I have found over the decades explain this phenomena. The first one to understand is that evolutionism or naturalism is a worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And the worldviews, especially when accompanied by a political agenda, can be extremely persuasive. Let me tell you a little bit about worldviews. Turns out I have a good reason for understanding this. I live in Germany. I know a great deal about the Nazi worldview. I also lived under a Marxist government. I learned a great deal about the communist worldview and worldviews. First, some principles. First of all, some aspects are true. Just because somebody says he belongs to a certain worldview doesn't mean that everything is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
All data and arguments available to a person that has grown up in a worldview seems consistent. The psychologists call this a Weltanschauung. They use a German word for that. It means worldview, a Weltanschauung. So now, when a worldview is part of a political agenda, you hear relentlessly from powerful organizations constantly why these views are true. You're always hearing this. And all the authority figures agree. The top scientists, the poets, the politicians, everybody agrees. And the opposition, anybody not believing that worldview, is demonized. And they use straw man arguments.
Yeah, one of the things that comes to mind is, I know they don't know exactly who said this, but it's attributed possibly to Goebbels, that if you tell a lie loud enough, often enough, and long enough, people start to believe it.
Yeah.
And also to your point about some parts are true. In order to sell a lie, you need to have a lot of truth mixed in. It's kind of like, the analogy of rat poison. Rat poison is like 99% good food. It's that 1% that kills you.
That's right. In the case of Goebbels, he, of course, spoke a message that people wanted to hear. There was some plausibility. So it's not just a blind repetition of nonsense, but it has to have an element of plausibility.
Right. That reminds me of our analysis of the National Public Radio broadcast. We recently analyzed NPR, and NPR is an organ involved in the propagation of a worldview. Yes. Very good stuff.
That's right. So let me give you just a couple of examples about world views to maybe clarify this. If we had lived under a Nazi system and did not have any reason to question what we had heard, we had grown up into it. Believe me, because I've looked deeply into it, and it's terrifying. Most of us would have been Nazis if you don't have a good reason to doubt it. It's very powerful. Remember, many Nazi soldiers died gladly for the cause. The population was glad to put up the sacrifice. You mentioned Goebbels. He often used the expression in German, "Wolltet ihr den Totalkrieg?" Do you want all-out war? And the people were frantically yelling, "Yes, yes, yes." So, or under the communism.
Crucify him.
Go ahead.
It kind of reminds me of shouting, "Crucify him." And, not the exact same analogy, but the masses just wanting, the bloodshed.
Right. That is a good point. Groupthink is part of the phenomenon. Under communism, same thing. They have their theories of materialism, of history, of culture. They believe this cause is more important than the individual, and it sweeps people along into this way of thinking. And yes, many revolutionaries have gladly died for communism. Pantheism is a worldview, and that brings us under naturalism or evolutionism. It is a worldview with a very powerful agenda. It's not like a worldview that's kind of harmless, a way of looking at things, but it is an all-encompassing way of looking at all nature. Now, in the case of the extreme form of worldviews, this dissent is brutally punished, always.
Yep.
So, boy, you didn't want to be caught on the wrong side of politics if you're living under the Nazis.
Yeah. You don't want to try to cross the Berlin Wall, and you don't want to try to cross the river in North Korea that separates North Korea and South Korea. That's correct. That kind of dissent is, like you said, it's brutally punished, often lethally.
Exactly. The good point is the word lethally. Sometimes it's not lethal. Sometimes it's a very strong form of scorn. I have a picture in front of me that shows a man holding a German sign, and it says, "I have defiled our race." Mm-hmm. He's standing here among a bunch of Nazis. Into their way of thinking, that was like the most disgusting, revolting thing you could possibly imagine. It's like, spreading your genes among apes or something. All of the hard evolutionary effort of building up the master race, millions of years of your ancestors to be stronger, more courageous, being defiled.
Oh wow! So this is a German citizen who married outside of the right. Superman race. Wow!
Right.
So public humiliation.
Exactly. Humiliation is a very important part. It's not necessarily as extreme as lethality, but it's cheaper, and you can do this and intimidate millions that way. The Chinese communists are very famous for that. Even today, this idea of public shaming. They wear signs or strange-looking clown hats, and for hours and hours, they have to stand in front of big, mocking crowds with bowed heads. Those images are influential, to put it lightly.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
They speak a lot to the consequences of a worldview. This is what where your worldview leads to things like this.
So when we come to our topic about evolutionism, this is a very strong phenomenon also. Words like intelligent design, creation science, reducible complexity, these things are mocked. Mm-hmm. The influence is so strong that it's almost impossible to get a good answer from something like ChatGPT. It will always respond with an addendum, but the scientific consensus is that, and then it'll tell you that all that is nonsense.
Oh yeah.
We have examples of that with artificial intelligence shows we've done with Daniel Hedrick, where you ask ChatGPT, and there's always, and I've tried it on different things, and there's always some qualifier. Hey, right. is this particular scientific fact true? And you might ask it something related to creation. It'll always have some kind of qualifier in there about how all scientists believe in evolution, things like that.
And the reason for this is not necessarily because they have tweaked the learning system. It's because the data that's feeding the learning system has been so massively polluted because there's such a huge effort. Mm-hmm. I've thought about this, the effort that goes into pushing evolution and to bad-mouthing the alternatives. How great is this effort? When I think every time somebody puts up a blog or a video that is in some way supportive of creationism or intelligent design, you get thousands of people responding right away with insults and all kinds of ways to intimidate. I bet that if we were to look at the effort that goes into making sure the textbooks are saying what the evolutionists want, the mass media, the publications, if we look at the total effort, we'll be talking about a dollar value per year that is greater than our space program was back in 1960.
Good point. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The difference is the Nazis are communists who've got a budget. In the case of evolutionism, these are passionate people that are volunteering a lot of resources.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Sure. Yeah. They've got to justify their own worldview. And so what better way to do that than to go out and fight for the cause? Yeah.
And you know, and they work really hard towards it. You know, Bob and I were talking
They
once,
do.
whenever either of us wrote some kind of article in favor of creation, I would post it on a forum that had a lot of evolutionists on it, because they'll pick it fine tooth and comb. They'll do such a thorough job of going through it because they want to find something wrong with it. So I actually leverage that, knowing their hatred and so if there was something I might have missed, they're actually good at reviewing that stuff because they spend so much time. They're so passionate about promoting their worldview.
Really true. I'm going to give some more principles. Before I do that, it's really important to have a clear understanding of what we mean by the word evolution, because people use that in different ways. First of all, the fundamental notion of evolution is that all living organisms descended from one common ancestor, the last universal common ancestor, the Luca. That is the fundamental idea. Most would also say, and the idea of evolution also implies a preceding period of random chemicals leading to the Luca. Mm-hmm. So for me, evolution is the whole package. From random chemicals, abiotic, no God, no guidance, we end up where we humans and other organisms are now. That to me is what I mean by the word evolution.
Yeah. And looking at the slide that we're showing on the video, I don't see anything in there about God or design.
Right.
Yeah. Totally missing. It's part of their worldview. Yep.
But and Doctor, as I look at the slide, can you help me understand the evolutionists always say, hey, we're not saying that apes evolved into men. Don't say that. That's stupid. That's not what we're saying. Is this how they do that with this chart? Is this how they get around that?
Evolutionists have many meanings for the word evolution.
Okay.
And often when they criticize others, they say, you denying the evidence from your eyes. There's evolution everywhere. Everything is changing. Mm-hmm. Plants change, different kinds of dogs have derived from gray wolves, okay? That is a different word, a different meaning.
Exactly. It's equivocation.
It's equivocation. In fact, let me deal with that. What is evolution in the word, in the true meaning, the only meaning of any interest to us, which is last common ancestor to us, versus a generic word evolution? That's so important. Mm-hmm. There are some true scientific principles that are not evolution in the strong sense that I'm using and that we're supposed to be using, but they're often claim to be evolution. Yeah. For example, whenever you hear a word like a founder effect, there's a founder effect, a handful of a subpart of the population moved to a new environment, and that led to another species. That's not evolution. Mm-hmm. Genetic bottlenecks, program adaptability, rapid evolution, epigenetics, natural selection, horizontal gene transfer, genomic rearrangements, none of that has anything to do with the fundamental question: is it true that all living organisms derived in a single cell?
Yeah, so this is kind of like illusionary devices they use to push evolution. So correct. I have a question for you, Dr. Truman. Was Noah and his family coming off the ark, was that evolution? I mean, because isn't that kind of a founder effect, genetic bottleneck in a sense?
No, because you see, the opposite is true. Evolution claims that there is no teleology, no plan. Therefore, the only source of variability can be random mutations in form. So all new traits, all new characteristics, for example, Polar bears have got swimming webs in their paws to allow them to swim. The evolutionists claim that all of this arose by chance over millions of years through random mutations. Now, what we're saying is the precise opposite. We're saying that in a very short period of time, Noah and his family, the clean and unclean animals coming off the ark, diverged very, very, very rapidly. Now, part of it was a founder effect, but that's not the main thing. The question is, where did the origin of variability come from to allow the founders to then diverge so quickly? And this is planned variability. God intended humans to not look like clones, but to be different, and animals also.
Yes.
So that is, there's a huge difference between information that is deliberately in our genomes to allow for adaptability and rapid change versus the question, did we all derive from this one common ancestral cell? The two different questions there.
Yeah, and we have plenty of shows in the past of this adaptation, and many examples from the evolutionists themselves where it happens way too fast for them to claim that random mutation did it, because there's no way random mutations could fix in a population. And now there's even some evolutionists that are kind of realizing that natural selection isn't this powerful mechanism that they claim it to be. They'll still bow to the gods of evolution, but it's interesting how, there's there's so many cracks in their story, but because it's such a strong worldview for them, it's a religion, they're not going to let go of it.
That's right. And therefore, we will also hear a lot of phrases attributed to evolution that are empty. It has no substance or content behind it. Like one is when you see very, very distantly related or very, very dissimilar organisms with a very, very similar feature, you just call it convergent evolution. It sounds like you've explained something, you've explained absolutely nothing. In many, many papers, when interesting biological features are discovered, then all of a sudden there's this throw-in standard statement through evolutionary processes, like, what does that have to do with
right? Like that covers everything.
Right. Or fine-tuned in the course of evolution is another favorite one, or due to evolutionary pressures. All of this sounds like an explanation, but it's part of the mechanism to protect the worldview.
Yeah. And I love the convergent evolution one, because what they're not telling you, there's so many examples where they have to use that. For example, the eye, they claim evolved down 40 separate independent paths. The eye, the complexity of the eye, that's remarkable. But they'll just wave their wand and say, convergent evolution. And so many people will just buy into that. Right.
Another similar notion is evolution is assigned miraculous abilities. Whenever something very, very complicated is found, like biomimicry, things like that, they just assume that evolution can solve those things.
Yeah, like the show you did with us earlier this year on binding sites and how complex those are. And they just wave their magic wand and how do you evolve a binding site? And you showed that you would need basically, and I'm paraphrasing, say there's 10 to the 80th molecules in the entire universe. Take 1,000 universes and say you've got to pick the correct molecule in 1,000 universes to win the lottery. I mean, it's just not possible. It's it's as impossible as you can get. Yet they claim it can happen, through evolutionary processes.
Right. Yeah.
Fine-tuned in the course of evolution due to evolutionary pressure. And then the naive student's like, oh, wow, yeah, I guess he's explained it. Okay, let's go to the next session in this class.
So a lot of this becomes kind of a background intuition. Most people that are not, let's say, professional scientists, but they're interested in science, have some education, they read the thing, and there's just kind of this very, very powerful intuition that with lots and lots of time, lots of organisms, can fine tune and tweak miraculous outcomes all by themselves. This is intuition. It's a feeling.
So what about the educational process?
Right.
How does this happen?
That is really important because we all start off young in our studies in high school. We're expected to learn the truth, facts. Like if you take an exam in Spanish or trigonometry, you're expected to regurgitate what you read or were taught. You would flunk if you were to say, well, but I think this phrase in Spanish should be translated this way. I disagree with the book. I mean, they'll laugh at you because it's crazy. Later on, you go into college, and in most cases, that's still true. If you want to learn engineering or astronomy, they teach you more or less facts. And there's no reason for a biology major to suspect that the rules have changed. That evolutionary doctrines are highly speculative. And actually, there are so many theories of evolution, even though Luca is not, some would say it was eukaryote, some would say it was something different. There are multiple models, but nobody questions in college as a biology student that evolution, whatever that means, is true. Now, continue with the educational process because there's a lot to be said there. Many professors, many very influential evolutionists are vehemently opposed to Christianity and very active.
Yes. The colleges.
So the pressure is intense. Exactly. The pressure is intense to conform, especially if you're a biology student. It's not so bad if you're in medicine or something else, and it's not much of a problem in engineering, but it is. And it's gone so far that any concepts dealing with creation science or intelligent design are simply forbidden from textbooks. Excuse is church-state separation without admitting that evolutionism is a philosophy and a lifestyle and a form of religion also.
Yes. Dr. Truman, it reminds me of my son when he was in college. He graduated about 3-4 years ago now, and how the groupthink with this whole global warming. So he was in one of those big classrooms that, have, I don't know, upwards of, 100, 200 students. And the teacher asked, does anybody here disagree with global warming? And my son was the only one, and his friend next to him. His friend, kind of meekly raised his hand, and Ryan was shooting his up. And so they were the only one out of, and it just shows you the power of the brainwashing. And there were probably other kids in there that didn't necessarily agree with it, but they were just too afraid to raise their hand.
A similar notion there is because of the discrimination against biblical beliefs, a lot of students therefore avoid those kinds of courses or those majors. And that accelerates this idea of a consensus view, because you're left only with those that are agreeable to the point of view. And a couple other things. When you go off to college, this could be like for Christian kids or people that have grew up in kind of a moral background with some Christian beliefs. It's the first time away from parental control. And getting rid of God's restraints can be very, very tempting. And students and staff typically in universities don't want those kinds of restrictions.
Yes.
And the thing is kind of fits in kind of nicely. I can remember the professor I got my degree from, supposedly a good religious Roman Catholic. He just came right out and told us, well, you guys, you're young and enjoy life, don't get married, just live together. These are the things that we were told in college.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, so they take advantage of the fact that this is the first time the kid's been away from home. So, Fred, I just got to say before we go on, well done with Ryan. You should be proud of yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, let me move on to a couple more general areas that I think will fill out the picture of why so many believe in evolution. One is the enormous power structure of evolutionist insiders. It doesn't mean that they are or need to be a huge majority, but the lever effect, the power they have for many reasons. There are some really big benefits in being an influential insider. For example, in the biology area, for key university positions, if anybody hears that you don't believe in evolution, you're in trouble. Now, all of your top journal editorial positions are filled by those who've gone through evolutionary training, your museum curator jobs, for example. Imagine studying paleontology and trying to get a job at a museum as a curator if you don't believe in evolution.
Yeah.
The chances are zero.
Exactly.
And in fact, I know personally two head curators of famous museums that lost their jobs after they started questioning evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And a fourth aspect is, where does the grant money come? Somebody's got to, evaluate all the grants being proposed, and these committees are made up of people.
Yeah. And
these people are themselves connected by a mutual self-interest. They know influential professors. Professors want to place their top students in museum jobs, and museum people want to get grant money. It's an incestual sort of a relationship of mutual interest.
Yeah, I think it was one of the leakies that said, man, we need to find some hominids quick or else the funding's going to dry up. And I'll try to dig up that quote, but yeah, you're exactly right. A lot of it's with grant money. If you don't believe in evolution, if you don't toe the line, you're not going to get that money.
Now, it's also true that many scientists have built their careers on evolutionary theories, and many other ones are hoping to. You've got to publish, you've got to have different ideas. So you look at the big topics people recognize, like the primeval soup or various famous fossil reconstructions, whether Lucy or other ones, dinosaur to bird transition, neo-Darwinian theory, population genetics, RNA world. With all of these, you can immediately say, this was a Nobel Prize winner that worked on that, and here is the world-renowned professor who worked on the other thing. This leads to two problems. One is people that became very, very famous because of their ideas are hardly going to say, you know what, that really was kind of a goofy idea after all. They're not going to do that.
It doesn't happen very often.
No. And the others that want to become rich and famous know they have to publish papers. And my impression from a lot of literature is a lot of it is really nonsense, especially in the origin of life chemistry area. But people are kind of polite because they know, well, everybody's desperate to get publications out, and I'm not going to go to the trouble of causing any waves. It's only when somebody is really motivated to discredit something somebody else has written in that area that the really solid, good answers come out that people like me have already seen and already, drawn attention to.
Yep. So Dr. Truman, what kind of experiences, because you were able to get your degrees and your PhD from, secular major universities, what kind of resistance did you see? Because you were able to, achieve those goals, which is, fantastic for us. Some creationists, some Christians are able to get their advanced degrees. We have many examples. Of course, many of the creationists now were evolutionists and then later became creationists. What's your story there?
It's really, I would say, only a major problem in some areas, biology-related areas, and also somewhat geology. So if you're going to go into paleontology or genetics or something like that for research, you're going to have to be extremely diplomatic or cautious.
Yeah.
If you go into medicine, in my case, I went into chemistry, and then after I got my degree, I started learning and becoming interested in the biology-related things. So in chemistry, it wasn't really a problem because, to put it bluntly, if somebody does not believe in a last universal common ancestor, it changes nothing. You don't do your research. I mean,
Exactly.
you don't do your research. The only thing that could slightly change are the algorithms used to reconstruct your phylogenetic trees, because those are assumed based on a biforking pattern that comes from a common ancestry.
Yep.
But other than that, you simply you don't. Nothing changes.
Yeah. So, and again, your PhD was in organic chemistry, and at
Yeah.
that level, I mean, you're exactly right. What could change? Yeah.
Right. And it's also true, and I don't want to go off on a tangent right now, but it's also true that so much of the prebiotic or early evolutionist type theorizing is so ridiculously speculative that you can start off on any area you want. How much amino acid were there in the oceans? I'm writing a couple of papers on that right now today. The values change from 10 to the minus 10 molar to about 10 to the minus 4 molar, a factor of a million difference that scientists come up with just based on more or less whatever they're trying to prove for their models.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a vast difference. Look at anything interesting in genetics, like spliceosomes. Spliceosomes are only found in the so-called eukaryotes, like humans, but they're not found in prokaryotes, like bacteria, at all. So now it's a question. When did the whole mechanism of spliceosomes and introns and exons come up? Well, pick your favorite evolutionist. Some will say it occurred during the RNA world. Some would say it occurred after the prokaryotes, and the eukaryotes split up. Some would say that it was inherited from the prokaryotes. Each one invents his model, then each one goes out inventing and collecting whatever data he thinks fits is.
Yeah, I remember.
It doesn't fit.
I remember Walter Riemann said it's like a smorgasbord of different things you can select.
That's correct.
It's like evolution is like fog that adapts to the landscape.
And because of the worldview that you started out telling us about, nobody's allowed to stop and say, wait, that's the wrong question. That's the wrong question. Why are we wasting time pursuing that question? No one's allowed to say that.
Yeah, so they'll deflect instead. They'll say, yeah, but to be a scientist, you've got to be a naturalist. They cannot be. And he said, well, wait a minute. What do you mean? You mean there's like no intelligence nor guidance of any form? That's not the world we live in. And all your experiments have been carefully planned and guided to give the outcomes you want.
Yep.
So I agree with you that the fundamental question is not being asked, but it goes back to my statement about it just doesn't change anything. There are enough evolutionists that would say, well, why couldn't there have been multiple origins of life? Why must there have been only one line that succeeded against all the others, forming a single Luca? Maybe there are multiple Luca. So even if you throw out the idea of a Luca, they're always going to come back to the naturalist foundation, which is however it worked, as long as God was involved, they're happy.
Yeah, that's the key.
Yeah,
right?
And it's interesting that with the design in nature, and I've read some cases where they think, well, life could have originated from silicon, but just what we see in design, it also points not to like a bunch of little g gods. It points to one designer. All life is carbon-based, for example. So Dr. Truman, we're actually getting short on time, and I was hoping maybe we could summarize why evolutionists believe in, why so many scientists believe in evolution. And I think one aspect you covered was just the whole educational process from Dr. Seuss all the way through college. You get inundated with evolution, and our kids just aren't getting the tools to do things like critical thinking. I have a slide whenever I give a talk on creation versus evolution. One of the things I try to convey to high school students, if you walk away from this presentation, please learn to think critically. And I have this picture of a baloney detector. Just have that baloney detector ready, because you're going to hear a lot of baloney. And I tell them, even have it with me. If you think I'm not saying something right, at least go and investigate it, and just don't take things for granted, because so many times people do that. Okay, Dr. Truman, we're almost out of time, and you've gone through 3 critical points. Can you go ahead and wrap up for us your other ideas of why scientists believe in evolution?
Right. One very important thing is convincing imagery. There's this kind of a intuition, a gut feeling that evolution, whatever that means, can do many, 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 many things. And we see this in all of the pictures and things like that. Let me give you an example. Think of the movie Jurassic Park 1. And in it, a bunch of dinosaurs were born, even though they're only females. And no males were producible because they had been genetically modified. The key message there was the scientist says, you don't understand or remember the history of evolution. If there's a problem, evolution will find a way.
Yes,
I remember
now.
that. Yeah, I remember my moment that I cringed.
Right. And that is the idea of this imagery.
Yeah, and that's where if you have the proper worldview and you're educated on this stuff, you can tell your kids who might be with you in the theaters, like, oh, yeah, let's talk about that afterwards. You know, they're bowing to the God of evolution.
Right.
It finds a way.
This the 5th point here is there's this barrage of constant evolution is a fact. You always come across news reports with sensationalist claims in the mass media constantly. But here, the word evolution is just in some manner referring to change of some kind, not the source of change. And we know that God created us with a huge potential for variability within the created kinds, but this is called evolution. A 6th point is now the word evolution in most minds has a positive association. We hear that evolution is equivalent to science. We hear words like the evolution of the airplane, the evolution of human character, and even worse, the evolution of human morality or theology. Yep. The idea of evolution has a positive thing. And the last thing that I wanted to share is super interesting. I guess I won't be able to go into detail, and that is for everything, there's a plausible narrative. Evolution is always right. So if you go through an exercise of all the scenarios, 2 organisms are very, 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 very similar. They have very similar genes, or one or more genes are missing or totally, totally different. There's always a very, very clever phrasing in word. Like if 2 organisms share a series of very similar genes, it is proof that they had a common ancestry.
Yep.
But if it's missing, it's obvious proof of rapid divergence.
Yeah.
Or if a gene is missing, evolution is related to adaptability. Sometimes a gene gain, who knows where they came from, a gene gain was necessary, and sometimes it was lost. Now, let's say that 2 genes are very, very similar, but the organisms are like totally different. Like you got a buffalo and you got, a turtle or a clam or something, right? Now you say the common ancestor was a long, 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 long time ago, but, quote, the genes are highly conserved. And somehow that now makes sense. But let's say instead.
But when it doesn't make sense, like when they found out that the Y chromosome, which was supposed to be pretty well conserved, was 30 to 40% different between humans and chimps, their scientific response to that was, this is horrendous.
Right. So in all cases, instead of saying this evidence contradicts the primary notion that similarity in organisms should parallel similarity in genes, there's always a story for every example. Let's say that the common ancestor between a couple of organisms was too long ago to really justify them both having inherited the same kind of gene that didn't change in like hundreds of millions of years. You would never say that's an exception. Now the phrase is, this is another remarkable proof of the power of convergent evolution.
It reminds me of punctuated equilibrium. The whole evolution happened in small populations, and their evidence for it is that you don't find, you only see gradual change in the fossil record. So that's their evidence, or that you don't see gradual change. So another one I remember, Dr. Truman, was they found, I think it was bacteria that had not changed over 1 billion years. And yet that was evidence of how evolution can happen, how things can remain in stasis. They used evolution as an evidence, and I'll try to dig that one up too and show it in the show summary notes. But I know exactly what you're talking about. There's so many examples.
These bacteria that were found in salt deposits, right? So yes, evolution can explain by stasis, that it does not change at all, or it can be virtually instantaneous, like cichlid fish in the Caribbean or lizards on the different islands, where change is like within a couple of generations, even less. So evolution can do everything.
Yeah, it's amazing. So we're pretty much out of time. You mentioned one thing. You said that how also they'll just keep screaming and shouting, evolution is a fact. Mm-hmm. Well, that kind of hits to home, because that's what got me into this whole debate, Dr. Truman. So I was probably, I think, I don't know, maybe 30 years old, or maybe my early 30s. And a guy at work told me that evolution was a proven fact. And I really didn't believe necessarily in evolution at the time, but I definitely believed in, millions of years for the age of the earth, billions of years, and billions of years for the universe, and God created dinosaurs as pets before he created humans and all that nonsense. But he was so adamant that evolution was a proven fact. That's what got me into the debate. I started researching it, and I don't know, within a couple months, I was mad at myself for letting myself be brainwashed. I'd never been exposed to all this evidence, not only against evolution, but also for an earth that's not billions of years old. So that one that one hits home, because that's what got me started, was their claim that evolution is a fact. A lot of people will buy into that, and this guy seemed really convincing. But there was something that didn't quite ring right with me, and that's what got me involved. And the first book I ever read was What is Creation Science by Gary Parker. That got me going on this whole thing. Well, Dr. Truman, this was really an honor having you go through why scientists believe in evolution. Really appreciate it. We'd love to have you back, because I know we've talked several times about some of the just so stories they come up with regarding the origin of life. And we'd like to, Dr. Truman, could you rejoin us at some point in the future and talk about the origin of life and why, what's the evidence for that? Why, what's the story behind evolutionists pushing that, what I call, which is obviously to us a fairy tale?
Yeah, be more than happy to.
Okay.
Yes. And so what you just mentioned, Fred, one of the reasons creation science is so important is I've found it to be one of the most effective means of getting a thinking atheist's attention for a moment, so that we might be able to reach them with the truth, and we might be able to reach them with the gospel. And so that's why we do what we do, because we're hoping some unbelievers out there will hear this and just stop and think for a moment. And we certainly do appreciate you contributing to that, Dr. Truman, and look forward to getting together and talking about origins of life, because that's a big one.
Sure.
Yes.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And so, and Doug, just to dovetail off of that, Paul said that the Greeks, the cross was foolishness. It's because they were brought up in a similar worldview where there's no God, there's no foundation. Whereas if you had a foundation like the Jews had, then the cross was merely a stumbling block. So we at Real Science Radio recognize the importance of the foundational truth of Genesis, and that God is the creator. And you can a lot of times get into a conversation with an atheist or just an unbeliever when you talk about origins, when you talk about the science. They're interested in that. A lot of people are. They don't want to, a lot of people just don't want to hear you say Jesus loves you, which he does, and we should never not preach the gospel. But we find that being able to present the gospel, if we lay the seeds and start getting them to think about the foundational truths, it makes it a lot easier to present it. So one of our goals at Real Science Radio is to bring about the fullness of the Gentiles. The more people that we can reach and save, the closer we are to Jesus's return. So I'd like to thank you again, Dr. Truman, for joining us. What a fantastic show, and your ability to just elucidate all these important points. And I'm looking forward to having you back on a show on the origin of life. So for Doug McBurney and Dr. Royal Truman, I'm Fred Williams of Real Science Radio. May God bless you.